All right.
All right, let's do it. Hello, everybody. I'm Alexa.
I'm Lukas.
We are the founders and creative directors of XK. XK is a design and motion studio based in London. We love to craft 3D visuals and films that are very tactile and fluid with an energy and detail that's almost hypnotic. Our collaborators and clients tend to come from the realms of beauty, tech, fashion, and arts, and we're usually brought on board to imagine new ways of abstracting visual narratives. And we often do that by touching on themes such as hyperreal nature, biomimicry, future science, and materiality, and sieving them through a digital lens.
And yeah, now it's no longer just the two of us. We have a core team of 6 people working in-house and a nice group of freelancers and collaborators who jump on board when needed. And we actually officially launched XK in the January 2020, which was literally a month before the start of global pandemic. That obviously made it difficult for us to move in a physical space, so we had to postpone that whole setup, but we were able to finally do it last year. So this is our sort of second home now. We're based near London Fields in East London. And of course, since this is a Houdini talk, we had to show you our one-to-one reconstruction of the studio inside of Houdini. We have to give a shout out to Jonathan for helping us with this. Oh,
thank you.
We did some vellum to wrap all the furniture in aluminium foil, because why not?
And yeah, today we're going to talk you through some of our favorite projects from the past year that we created using Houdini, touch on concept, design, R&D, show you a few breakdowns of some of the scenes, as well as some tools that really helped speed things up in production.
All right, so the first project we're going to show is a film that we did for Biotherm and Carbios. Massive shout out to Zelig, who did the audio. And yeah, the story behind this film was a partnership between the two companies, Carbios and Biotherm, that created this revolutionary product, which was actually the very first beauty product made of infinitely recyclable plastic. And we were brought on board to work with AKQA Paris to tell the story and the similarities between the two companies through the split-screen film.
Yeah, most plastic can be recycled about 2-3 times before its quality degrades to the point that it's no longer usable. And Carbios, which is a French biotech company, they've figured out this way to break down plastic to its smallest building block, the polymers, and then take that and reassemble like new virgin quality plastic, creating this closed loop of infinite recycling.
And at the same time, on the Biotherm side, their product is based on live plankton, which is a microorganism originally sampled from the Pyrenees thermal lakes and then synthetically recreated in the lab. So they also have a very strong stance on sustainability and biodegradable formulas.
Yeah, and our core concept for the film was to create these parallels between these two stories by creating a symmetrical balance where the visual weight of each element is distributed in a way that it makes the whole frame feel stable, with similar motion being performed by the two sides or one action influencing the other side.
And yeah, we started at R&D, and we followed on the plastic side. We follow the way how it's broken down from the PET bottle to kind of shredding of it to the polymer breakdown all the way to the assembly. And we kind of try to stay true to the actual science and the process itself, but of course come up with an interesting motion that would stand on its own, but also could be linked on the other side of the plankton story.
Yeah, the way we depicted these polymers was quite crucial because this is what lies at the at the core heart of Carbios process, and we definitely wanted to be accurate to some degree. And usually when tackling these design challenges that are rooted in science, we try to decide what's the element that has to be kept and where can we go bonkers with it, where can we bring that visual interest. And in this case, we thought if we start and portray this molecular design at the start, but then envelop it in multiple copies of itself, and we create this almost onion skin-like effect where we can then cut into it, and we create a very nice balance of detail where only certain parts are exposed. And this is a quick setup that we had built for this. It's primarily using a for loop with VDB sort of reshape and smooth and Boolean inside of it. And what this pretty much does is that it takes the original molecule structure, it progressively inflates it and smooths it and cuts into it with these animated booleans. And it was super fun to play with this setup and really dial up these numbers of copies just for fun, but then toning it down for the actual film.
Yeah, we then uses the similar concept of the VDB offsetting for this shot, where the moving geometry that was like based on an RBD sim that was connected with some kind of plexus-like effect was then used as a base for that, and again using this layer kind of onion skin effect applied on that to sort of layer it even more and make it a little bit more interesting. And apart from the molecules, another big part of the projects were these robots. And for us, we wanted this robot to make it look real, like a real science, because this is actual real science that's happening. This is nothing like sci-fi, so we wanted to still make it look like a real thing. But we didn't want to use like an existing robot somewhere. We just built one ourselves. And just to quickly kind of talk through how that was done a little bit, we sort of combined bits of non-destructive modeling with pieces of kind of actual hand topo build work, moving polygons around. And we would use like super basic modeling nodes like polybridge or skin that let you use sort of profiles that we then skin using some other nodes, and then quadrimesh in them, or VDB in them first, actually, to get these smooth shapes before sort of turning this topology into something nice and clean, and then working on that further, which was really cool because it allowed us to sort of tweak and be really playful with the initial sort of geometry and be able to move that around without actually having to model all this from scratch, and every time we would want to make a change, having to go and remodel that again.
Now, moving on to the Biotherm side, and when working, for the water itself, out of which this plankton is sampled from, again, we wanted to strike this balance between realism and like surreality, because this was meant to depict a place that it's real. It's a thermal lake in the Pyrenees Lakes. It's not something on an alien planet. So it was very important to strike the right balance in terms of the scale, the sort of intricacy for the glass itself, and most importantly, the color tonality. And this is why we gravitated towards a warmer, earthy tone for the grass, and then that would really complement the blue hues of the skies and of the lake within it. And the final look still resembles somewhat of a real landscape, but it's slightly stylized, a slightly minimal version of it. And when it came to the plankton itself, which had to be portrayed at different sort of sections in the film, both at the micro and macro scales, we wanted again to strike this balance between abstract and real, because you didn't want to make something so abstract that people say, well, this could be anything, but then not make it so real that people are wondering, am I watching the Discovery Channel? And the plankton type that we were working with looks something like this. It's a microorganism that's like transparent, and it comes in the form of these like thin, long rods with these repeated molecules sort of along its length. And when we deal with this sort of, again, organisms, we try to look for properties within it which have to be kept, and then where can we take more creative liberties. And the repetition of that single element was quite significant, so we decided to keep that, but instead bring in more variety in the form, because this had to be portrayed in different scenarios. So for example, here we explored ways of how it would look like on its own, or how it would look as part of a bigger cluster. And then with regards to its look, of course, we were dealing with an organism that's so fragile and so delicate, and we wanted to convey that through the use of refraction. And to give you a little bit of a breakdown of how this was made, it was primarily a vellum hair simulation with custom attributes for the core and for the clusters themselves, which then gets swept. So you are creating this little branch and very fluid structure that almost hints at the little sort of shapes that were in our reference and in our initial style frames. And look-wise, again, we were keen to achieve this balance between transparency and diffusion, clarity versus haziness. And on the lighting front, we wanted to use a combination of backlights and top lights to give you this feeling that you are somewhere at the bottom of a lake, but you brought some studio lights with you. And at the same time, thinking about the widest view, and looking at these beautiful images of phytoplankton, which is a slightly different kind of plankton, but it's the same family. We sort of noticed that, the plankton itself is unable to propel itself against the current. So they almost act as visualizers for, the ocean currents themselves. So we took that behavior and tried to visualize it inside Houdini, creating these compositions where flurries of particles and trails coming in and out of focus, creating something that's very dreamy. And this is a bit of a breakdown of how one of the scenes was made. Despite it being a fairly straightforward pop simulation at its core, I think the trick here was packing these particles and these trails with as much detail as possible, so the light would really refract and reflect nicely on it, and then combining that with volumetrics and heavy depth of field, you arrive at something that's very dreamy, but at the same time, it hints at that real organism behavior.
And yeah, apart from that, the R&D on the Biotherm side was again following the process of how the actual sunmilk was created, going from the kind of watery bits through to how it's been harvested from, to the sort of lab fermentation purification and creation of the final formula. So, at the start with some ocean tools that we use, obviously vellum for the plankton, but then we also use these kind of small-scale flip fluid simulations that we try to, keep as stable and nice and non-jittery and flickery, but also full of detail and interest.
We also got to collaborate with Apple last summer for the launch of the new MacBook Pro. We were commissioned to create a digital bloom artwork to be used across the Apple website and digital stores and other sort of retail. And this was meant to speak to this idea of power, both in a technological sense, because the device itself would feature these mighty M1 Pro and M1 Max chips, but also power in the hands of artists. And if you know us, you know that we absolutely love working with flowers. They are such great carriers of meaning and emotion. And we started developing these individual petals that were quite organic in their detail and movement, but the shading was heavily inspired by the device itself. So predominantly using chrome, but then contrasting that with these very intense pops of color. And as the device would feature one of the best screens that's ever been on a MacBook, as they usually do when they launch a new one, XDR, beautiful liquid retina display, we wanted to create something dark onto which these overly saturated colors would really stand out and emphasize this idea of the black is black and pink is pink and so on. This was another early exploration where we wanted to create an abstract flower that is made out of these strands that could be seen as optical fiber, but then take this very synthetic and man-made look and bring in that sort of natural feel, more human feel through its motion. And again, this was sort of created using vellum hair, and you probably realize by now vellum hair is one of our favorite sort of tools to use, and vellum is probably the best thing that happened to Houdini, for us as designers, and we wanted to create something that we carefully guided through the use of forces and colliders to achieve this very graceful sort of lifting motion. And this ended up driving a lot of the motion going forward and served as the prequel to the explosive burst that came afterwards.
Yeah, we took these hair sims as a base and then started to kind of layer it up, see what else we can do with it. Here we try to actually take the sim itself and then mesh it to get this sort of thin layer that we would apply this motion back onto to start developing a little bit more layered look that we would use for the sort of opening moment. And we also explore this kind of more of a digital kind of plasma looking roots, again using vellum hair, using vellum sims, and then adding some animated textures on top to sort of help propel this big burst moment. But somehow, yeah, the combination of these sort of metallic petals that had some added man-made shapes on top of them is, what we really thought was working great.
Yeah, it was super cool that we were able to push the number of hairs. I think at this point we had about 7 million of them, but only simulated a fraction of that. And then compensate that really intricate hair and detail with this black sort of translucent iridescent glass that almost acted as a little nod to the material on the Apple logo that's on the back of the MacBook Pro.
Yeah, it's actually right here. But yeah, overall, it was a super cool collaboration that we were able to work with Apple, and they gave us great creative freedom. And what was cool is that then we actually, when we got the laptops and we were able to run the actual scenes on it with Houdini and Redshift, it was kind of a great circular movement. And
Yeah, another project we did is this collaboration with Hublot for their Sapphire Rainbow watch. Let's play the film. Thank you. We were brought on this project by Hublot, who collaborated with a very well-known Japanese artist and wanted us to create a launch film that would really sort of speak to this idea of Swiss craftsmanship and blend that with these psychedelic and rainbow-hued colors. And our concept was to deconstruct the watch into its core components and raw elements and raw materials and hero them through abstraction. And we would take the sapphire, the sort of inner mechanism, the rubber band and the crystal and bring in that surreal feel and impossible physics to it. And as for the flower, which was, the most important component of them all, our intention was to create this culmination point where you arrive at this sculptural sort of like flower where its elements, its leaves, petals, and stems would be directly linked to the components of the watch itself. And yeah.
R&D time.
R&D time.
So at the start, we really tried to push the idea of the impossible physics and got some really fun and cool results that were kind of, maybe at the start a bit too much and not really paying enough respect to the craftsmanship of Hublot and the sort of Swiss precision and materiality and the attention to detail and all that. So we kind of reined it in a bit later, but it's always fun to have a vellum clock rotating like this.
Yeah, we explored ways of making those vellum simulations of the cogs a little bit more sleek through the shading, through the lighting. But yeah, as Lukas was mentioning, it really lost that Swiss precision and technical materiality that you can see on the right-hand side. So we decided to keep the mechanism undistorted and sharp and bring in that psychedelic vibe a bit more graciously through fluid elements that would be seeping through and carefully placed colored lighting that gave the mechanism this sort of iridescent feel.
And then on the sapphire side, which is what the kind of body of the watch is made of, because it's grown synthetically in the lab, which is a kind of big proud point for Hublot. We try to depict it in the most beautiful way. So we spend quite a lot of time on R&D in this, as well as the actual sapphire case and the way how it's been carved out of that sort of grown piece. And this is how it kind of ended up looking, and we tried to play with the dispersion to again bring some of the psychedelic colors in, and also to bring just as much detail here in the kind of growth process, but then keep it really quite neat towards the end when you actually then get to carve out that watch, which is something very precise, very beautiful.
As for the rubber band, we wanted to portray this idea of art of fusion, aka combining more modern materials such as rubber with more traditional metals, and really show this like synergy between the two, and also taking those grooves from the original watch design and exaggerate them. So when you bring in the colored refraction and colored lighting, this would create these very intricate gradients within themselves.
And then for the sort of culminating movement of the flower reveal, yeah, we explored several ways how to bring the petals to life. You can see bits, we started with some fluid and some bit more kind of wild shapes, but, we really needed to sort of stay grounded in the actual design of the flowers. So then we kind of, again, reined it in, but had more fun with sort of ways of making that come alive with use of mobs and just kind of more sort of motion graphic-y feel that I think ended up kind of bringing it all together.
The final sequence that you see in the film ended up being made of two separate parts that we combined together. The first one was taking that initial star frame and bringing the petals to life using vellum cloth and using RBD for the trails of the diamonds that was crawling up the petals, while the second was done using mops with this like spraying action of the petals growing that was afterwards simulated with vellum. So you bring in a bit of that natural bend to them, and then use that to sort of like point deform the really high intricate mesh that contained all those hundreds of diamonds.
And obviously, since this is a product film and the watch is very expensive and it needs to look super perfect in the film, don't look up how much.
Don't look up how much it is.
We had to remodel almost every part of the watch, which obviously took us quite a few weeks. And obviously, we couldn't wait for it all to be remodeled at once before getting into production and getting into R&D, because we had a very, very short timeline on this. So kind of a little bit more into the process and some of the tools that we had to really go in and split the watch into all these different sections and come up with a way how these would be sort of swappable throughout the process as the new sort of versions of each of the components were becoming available. So, for this we used quite a few different little techniques and bits and sort of simple little scripts and knowledge that we kind of gathered over a few different projects and films that we worked on that were involving products that had like multiple parts to them. Just to show some of the other bits to quickly illustrate this, we did a few projects for Master and Dynamic, who do all these super cool earbuds. You have to work with the case, with the headphones, and you find on something like this where you have a product and you have a lot of parts to it. Sometimes the kind of natural way to deal with this in Houdini might be a little bit too sort of cumbersome, and it's hard to kind of for a designer to be picking. You want to just pick your bits of the headphone and attach materials to them. And yeah, this can be very, very unintuitive if you're trying to do it on a subs level. So we kind of developed a few tools that I'm going to super quickly run through, as it's like really more natural to do this on an object level where you can kind of select parts of it, drag and drop materials on it. You want to do it in a viewport, that's what we did. But then to sort of bring it back into subs, you can just select all the bits that you want, press one button, and you get it all imported into sort of like one merged sub, where we also bring along a kind of name attribute of it that we can use later, and also kind of bring the material that you assign, which means like all the stuff that you did by hand in the viewport is there, and then you can take it and do some subs fun with it, duplicate it, rotate it, do whatever you want with it. We kind of like did also the opposite thing. You know, sometimes you bring something where everything is merged and you want to split it. We have a one button that just kind of splits it all, and you can then look and work on the individual parts before kind of merging them back together. And the most important thing, when you work on this, you're going to end up with loads of materials and different versions that you don't want to use. And unfortunately, I don't know any way that you can do it the same way how you can do it, for example, in cinema, that you can just delete unused materials. So we did a button that you press, and all your materials that you don't use, quite a lot of them here, are just colored red, and then you can, you know, delete them, move them somewhere else off screen or whatever to just like keep it nice and tidy. And the last project that we have is ident that we did for warp film. Let's have a look. And on this, we collaborated with an agency from Sheffield called Peter and Paul. And yeah, it was warp films are also from Sheffield. You might know them for films such as This Is England, Submarine. Recently, they did a film called Everybody's Talking About Jamie.
One of the main concepts was this idea of duality, which is reflected in the range of themes that their films and projects cover. So going from studying these very delicate moments of adolescence and deadpan humor to these very brutal and visceral outbreaks of violence. And the films also have quite a distinct color palette and very gritty aesthetic.
And the duality itself also sort of manifests through the actual town of Sheffield where they're from, which on one hand is this kind of rough industrial mining town that's covered with all these concrete iconic buildings, but it's also an area that's home to this beautiful blue crystal called Blue John. And the landscape that surrounds the town sort of, again, shows this duality as well, because it's this stunning kind of Hobbit-like looking thing, but then on the other side you have these gigantic manholes and crazy industrial buildings inside that's kind of surround it.
Yeah, so we started to look into these combinations of contrasting colors and surfaces and started developing the look of these crystals. And was very important how these crystals would then be mapped onto the logo in a way that they don't just look stuck on top. So at the start, you know, they only appear in parts of the inner walls that have been created by chiseling at the surface first and keeping that crisp blue color of the crystal, but complementing it with these reds and purples to convey that duality that we mentioned earlier. Also playing with different scattering methods and noises in Houdini to achieve this balance between, you know, the actual really sharp crystals and slightly more smooth sort of areas.
And yeah, as a part of our R&D process, we just played with lots of different solvers and ways of animating, trying to, again, find this contrast between these kind of really jittery diamond growth animations, which were sort of balanced by these smooth sort of growth solvers. And we kind of literally threw everything at the logo, including these flips with suction force, but always tried to kind of, you know, keep it in a frame so that it, you know, in the frame of kind of design mind, so that that we sort of don't lose the picture of the overall design. And yeah, for one last breakdown, I thought I really liked this shot, so I thought I'm just going to tell you how that was done. We started with a kind of close-up of the logo, which was just without any distortion or anything on it. Then we ran a sort of a spread solver that ran through from our kind of custom spawn points using some random animated scale to give it this idea of like violent growth. We then sort of added this through a solver so that it all just accumulates over time. So you get this kind of build-up. And this we then use to sort of boolean and cut out of the logo. And I just have to say the Houdini boolean holds up super well, and it's like the best boolean there is. We then isolated the inside of the Boolean so that we can later sort of place crystals or like place these spawn points for the crystals. This is how it looked with sort of crystals on it as it's growing up. And here they're just scaling up, but in the actual final bit, we use these sort of animated proxies so that they actually pop up, even though it's not like super visible. And then to add like another layer at the end, we use this kind of these spread points from the start. And this time we sort of added them into a growth solver that was sort of retimed and smooth over time. So then, yeah, this is how that thing looked at the end in the viewport. And just one last time, the final bit.
And I think that's it. Thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you, Side Effects, for inviting us once again. Thank you to the XK team. Everybody give a shout to our team. For all the amazing work. So yeah,
we'll see you in the corridors.
Yeah.
All right, you guys, any questions?
Amazing work, guys. Any questions?
That was easy.
All right. Yeah, let's get some beer.
There's a question in the back.
What rendering engine do you primarily use?
Sorry?
What rendering engine?
Oh, yeah. We use Redshift.
Still Redshift?
We use Redshift, but depending on projects, sometimes we use a bit of V-Ray and a bit of Octane now and then. But Redshift is our go-to. Yeah, it's quite stable and quick, for the kind of work that we do.
Cool. Thank you.
Other questions? Over there.
Thanks for the talk. I think I have a new favorite studio. That work was absolutely mind-blowing.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
So yeah, thanks for coming and talking and being so inspirational. To me, I think this has been one of my favorite talks at OFF so far. Thanks again. Just following on from, I think another round of applause, right?
Thank you.
So just following on from the Redshift question, I'm a 3D motion designer as well. It's cool to see you guys are kind of changing the game and seeing how far you can push the envelope in motion graphics, rather than kind of full-on massive studios like MPC or something else like that with a smaller team of people. So following on from the Redshift question, kind of how are you managing your rendering pipeline, and are you using things like cloud to render some of this stuff? Because it's all super gorgeous, high-end rendering. So how are you managing that?
Well, we have a bunch of computers locally that we just build over time. Just love building computers and buying GPUs and stacking the boxes up, and just using standard deadline and kind of not having to use the heating over the winter. And having 48 degrees in our meeting room where we had to move the servers there for a bit.
Yeah, but 2 air cons now made it somewhat tolerable in the summer. For sure. No worries.
Yeah.
Hi guys. I have a question regarding data management. So you were in the 90s, creating folders inside of folders, and that's it? Or you have something more advanced in terms of cataloging your own data, all the assets that you generate from materials, environments, and operations code and all of that?
We were totally in the 90s, I'm afraid.
Totally.
Okay.
Maybe, late 90s.
Thank you.
There's one more over there.
Yeah. Obviously, the R&D phase of a project is really important for you guys, and I was wondering how much of a percentage of a project you spend on that, and if you could speak to it just a little bit and how important it is.
Sorry,
How much of R&D do we do? Percentage in a project?
I think it depends on the projects that we do and their timeline. I mean, the industry has changed a lot. You know, the timelines have really shrunk, and at this point, we probably don't have more than 6 weeks to create a film. So that R&D period has shrinked maybe to about 2 weeks at the start. But the way we work, I think it's quite still very R&D going into production a little bit more, because we don't, you know, create a storyboard and then just like really lock it in and go and execute it. You know, we have a very strong mood board and very strong idea of what needs to be portrayed. We have our strong R&D period of about 2 weeks. You know, that then leads to some sort of an animatic, but then if we realize that halfway through the project some things could still be improved, we might do a quick R&D, try some things out, because the nature of Houdini allows you to be so sort of like free and procedural and build upon things quite easily. We can, you know, keep injecting these little R&D episodes in the middle of a production. So I think, yeah, it varies, but we put a lot of emphasis onto that, because that's how our best work sort of like came out, just lots of R&D and lots of experimentation.
Yeah, and if it's a 6 weeks project, you know, you might only have 2 to 3 weeks. But if it's a 3 months project, then, you know, we'd love to spend 2 months.
At least a month and a half, yeah.
Yeah, as we all would, yeah.
Yeah.
It's beautiful to see. Great work, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe one more question?
Hi guys,
Hello.
Hello.
amazing showcase today.
Thank you.
I've been postponing the idea to jump into Houdini probably for 4 years. I'm not lazy, but I would like you to give us, to those who are here and never gave the chance to get in and deep into it, to not to be afraid to jump in, because that's me.
Yeah, I don't know, I feel like it's like bungee jumping. You know, when you stand there at the top, it just feels like you're gonna die, but
But once you do it,
but you're strapped in. So as long as the rope is strong, you'll be okay. But then, you know, during the process, you just find that. I mean, it takes some time, of course, getting through it, and it's great if you have, you know, like Vincent, if you have Mo on your hotline, then that helps. If not, you know, there's so much material now out there, apart from Intagma, the side effects, I think have got literally the best education there is in any 3D software. There's like so much material out there covering just about everything. And so I think what's good is just to start small. You know, you're not going to go like, I never use Houdini. I have this massive project that has got a deadline in 2 weeks, and it's 1 minute film. I'm going to use Houdini for this. Yes. But like, I want to make a little statue melt, or, you know, I want to do something. I want to do this one thing. I have an idea. I want to do that. Start with that one small thing, and then build on top of it, rather than be like, now I'm going to completely move my pipeline from wherever into Houdini, and that's it.
yeah, I think it definitely is a steep learning curve, but you just have to give it that patience and time. And I think for me personally, I used to be a C4D user for about 4 or 5 years, and for a while I was like in between the two softwares and like trying things in there, getting frustrated, going back to cinema. But I think over time, the more you learn, the more you'll feel confident and start to like really embrace it and you know, do all aspects of your project inside Houdini.
Yes, in terms of pipeline of work, which high percent do you use Houdini in a full production project besides the render engine, whichever you pick?
We use Houdini for absolutely everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
I mean, maybe for the modeling tool, sometimes, you know, we might not do that, even though we do still model in Houdini, but not everything. But apart from that, everything is done in Houdini.
Okay, thank you, and a big applause.
Thank you.